Hello everybody, in this video we are going to continue our conversation about quadratic factors and their zeros. So in this specific video we are going to graph a quadratic equation or function, and we are going to use our calculator, whether it is a TI Inspire calculator or another graphing calculator or even Desmos, to check our answers. So we're going to use a little bit of technology to be able to verify whether we have the correct answer or not. And I'm going to show you those tricks in this video. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to take this function the way it is without doing anything to it. We're going to type it into our calculator and graph it out. Now keep in mind that these are not going to be perfect points, and we're just going to use those points to sketch our graph out. So I do want to remind you that I am using a TI Inspire. So if you're using also a TI Inspire, I will walk you through the steps on how to graph your function. So the first thing I'm going to do is start in my home screen, hit enter. If you already have something here, you can hit no. And then I'm going to hit number 2 to add my graph. All right, let me move my function up right here. And then I'm going to go ahead and add that across the top. So we're going to say 5x squared minus, notice I'm using a minus and not a negative for the 13x. I'm using another minus for the 6. Remember that if you're using negatives, you should only use a negative with the first number. Everything else in between numbers are going to be minuses. Now, once I hit enter, I can see what the graph is supposed to look like. I can see that it crosses the x-axis in 2 different places, here and here. And I can go ahead and create a table, so I can use exact points to create my own graph. So we're going to hit Control T, and we're only going to pick the points that fit on here. Now you're going to realize that not a whole lot of points fit on here. So actually our graph won't be very effective here. The only one that we can graph is 3, 0. So 3, 0, which is unfortunate. Now, if you're using something like Desmos, we can go ahead and create a graph and zoom in and out. So let me show you how to do that real quick if you're using Desmos. All right, so if you're using, or if you've ever used Desmos before, you can go to Desmos Graphing, and then you want to hit Graphing Calculator, and it will generate a graph for you here. So all you're going to do is you're going to take your expression and you're going to type it in here. So let me type it in. 5x squared minus 13x minus 6. I know you can't really see my screen because it kind of cuts off over here. But once you type it in, you're going to hit enter. Now, one of the things I do want to mention about the x squared, you can hit Shift 6. Shift 6 will allow you to write in an exponent, okay? So notice that this is what our graph looks like over here. So you can zoom in and out so you can kind of see what it looks like. Now the great thing about Desmos is it's a little bit easier to use than any of our graphing calculators, because if I want to see what those points are, like this, I can also click on them and it will, or I can hit this little icon right here to create a table, and I can kind of look at the table itself. But if I'm just looking for points, notice that Desmos kind of highlights my points right here. So we can see that it's a negative 0.4. So I'm going to add that to my actual graph. And then I can also add 3 and 0. All right, so let's go ahead and add those numbers, those x-intercepts, to our graph, and then we can just ignore the other part. All right, and one of the great things about Desmos is that you can use that on your STAR test as well. So if you're going to take your STAR Algebra 1 test, you can use Desmos and open it up and kind of look at the points on the graph and create that if you're a little more intimidated or with your calculator. So Desmos is a very user-friendly graphing calculator that allows you to kind of look for exactly what you're looking for, like in this case, x-intercepts. So I went ahead and added our points here. So I'm just going to remind you that we're just using this graph to be able to verify our answers when we solve this. So the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead and create an x. I'm going to kind of create it over here in the corner so we can factor this out. So I'll replace the f of x with the 0 here in a little bit. But just remember, this is your a, this is your b, this is your c. Now I'm going to ignore the negative on the c because this is telling me I'm looking for two numbers that subtract to be 13. So I will be looking for two numbers that subtract to be 13 and negative 13. And then remember that it also has an x, so whatever we replace it with has to also have x's here. So we're going to multiply 5 times 6. 5 times 6 gives us 30. And you can use your calculator if you want to for this, but 30 is not a big number and it doesn't have as many factors. So I'm going to start with 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 4 does not divide in evenly, before 5 and 6 does. And now we have all our factors listed here. Now remember what I'm asking for. I'm looking for two numbers that if you subtract them, give you 13. Subtraction is the key word here. And the reason I'm saying that and emphasizing that is because some of y'all will probably look at the 3 and the 10 and say, oh, if I add 3 and 10, it will give me 13. That is true. But that is not what we're looking for. We're looking for a set of numbers that if you subtract them would give you 13. So that automatically boots this one out and leaves you with 2 and 15. 2, if you subtract 2 from 15, it will give you 13. So because we're subtracting, we know that our signs are going to be different. So because I need a negative 13, I'm going to give the negative to the 15 because it's bigger, which will make the 2 positive because different signs would give us subtraction. All right, so I forgot to put my 30 on the top here. So numbers that multiply to be 30, but subtract to be 13, 15, and 2. So we're going to do something in 2 steps here. I'm going to take out the f of x and replace it with the 0. I like my 0 at the end. And then I'm also, in the same step, I'm going to replace that negative 13, our b value, with negative 15x plus 2x. So I'm going to start off with 5x squared minus 15x plus 2x minus 6 equals 0. Okay. Now that I have 4 terms, I can split it down the middle and look for the GCF. So the biggest number that divides into 5 and 15, 5. They both have x's, so we can only take 1 because that's the smallest of the 2 exponents. So we're going to divide both of these numbers by 5, and we're going to subtract both of these exponents by 1. So we get 1x minus 3, no x. All right, I'm going to take this plus sign, bring it down. The biggest number that divides into 2 and 6 is 2. Because they don't both have x's, we're just going to divide by 2, which gives us 1x minus 3. Both of these are equal to each other, so that lets us know we did it correctly. And then take your GCFs and put it in the same parentheses. Now bring down your equal 0, and I want to remind you that both of these represent your x-intercepts. We're going to take this and set it equal to 0. We're going to take this and set it equal to 0. And we're going to solve for the x. So we do this the same way we've been doing, even if there's a 0 at the end. We're going to add 3. So we get 1x is equal to 3. And if you divide by 1, everything stays the same. And so the answer is x is equal to 3. Notice that we do have an x-intercept at 3, a positive 3, so it matches. And then the second one, we're going to subtract 2 from both sides and get 5x is equal to negative 2. We're going to divide by 5. And notice that 5 does not divide into a negative 2. So it's going to stay as a fraction, negative 2 over 5. Now, if you don't want to use the fraction, that's perfectly fine. But I do want to remind you that we would have to simplify this to make it match. So we knew that this is a negative 0.4. So we just need to make sure that this is also a negative 0.4. So if you take negative 2 and divide it by 5, it gives us a negative 0.4. So we know it matches. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to color code this, and then I'm going to show you some tricks on your calculator for you to check to see if you did this correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pause the video right here, and I am going to throw the calculator stuff in the next video just because it's not actually us working anything out, but it's just showing you a trick on your calculator or on Desmos. You can use the same method on the Desmos to check to see if your function and your factors are correct. So it's just a little tip, it's just a little trick. So I'm going to put that in another video. So you can click on that if you want to be able to use your calculator to check your work, whether it's on a STAR test, whether it's on a quiz, or whether it's on a test, or to check your work on your homework. So I'm going to pause right here. I hope that the explanation that I went through has helped you understand what we're doing a little bit better, and I'll see you guys in the next video.